Well, this is the most powerful news broadcast in the world in the morning in this time slot. I am Rex Jones, and I'm here today to tell you we've got the best geopolitical information in the entire world to deliver you right now. We're going to get into it right now with our guest, Simon Dixon. Tim Tompkins, my co host here, figuring it out today. Simon, how are you doing?
I'm awesome. Congratulations on the new show and really happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Yeah, we had you on the gray area earlier. Fantastic show. Everybody loved it. And I was like, we got to get him on Infowars. We got to make this happen. So
I think it was the best interview we've ever done on the information, on the fact side of it, out of like me learning the most. And that's high praise, I know, but I want to give it to you. And that's why we had to deliver it to other people as well.
We're men of our words. We just wanted to get you on. So let's just get started because there's a lot that people don't know about you, Simon. And I want to talk specifically before we go into more other details about your personal history and some of the things that's led you to the positions where you're at now, because your story about Wall Street and all of the things is something that needs to be heard. So can you just walk us through a high-level overview of that, of your history?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've done nothing but obsess over the topic of money and who benefits from the creation of money for the last 25 years. My journey started when my father lost his entire retirement in the dot-com boom and bust, so 25 years ago. And he worked his whole life, lost it all in the market, and asked me to figure out where it went. So that kind of kicked off an obsession. Tried to figure it out at university, did like a master's in economics, still didn't get the answers. So I tried to get into the investment bank and figure out how money really worked. Got a job as a T-boy, ended up as a stockbroker, figured out that, all right, we're here just to sell stocks. It doesn't matter whether it's wrong or right. Ended up in the city of London working as a market maker, realized that our job is to manipulate the prices of shares. And when we have institutional traders, our job is to find the retail to dump it onto. I then started working in corporate finance at the investment bank and realized that this whole process of financializing and securitizing companies means that you end up becoming a cog in a wheel of what I call a financial industrial complex.
Right.
And in fact, finance is used for subordination, almost like a blackmail leverage operation like we've seen. And also that war is a racket. And that, often when you're writing business plans around where war zones are going to be, where war zones aren't going to be, it turns out that these financial institutions have a significant degree of influence in it. So that was my corporate career.
Now, you said something really powerful there, and I want to, before you go further, I want to talk specifically about your experience, because there's an experience that the average American, or not even just American, people around the world know about how financial systems work. But then you were deeply embedded in seeing how things operate behind the scenes. So
behind the curtain.
Behind the curtain.
Who's the Wizard of Oz?
Yeah, that's what Rex and I want to understand specifically, and the average person. What's really happening behind the scenes that people misunderstand?
Yeah, so I talked about this concept of a financial industrial complex, and it consists of different institutions that plug together in order to turn all companies and all investors into as much subordination as they possibly can. So, firstly, we all know that banks, retail banks, their Wizard of Oz skill is that they get to create fiat currency. So every time they issue a loan, they actually create, they create new money, new fiat currency. The vast majority of fiat currency is created by a retail bank. The problem is that it has interest on top to be repaid. And so when you need to repay that interest, you either invest it in a productive asset that goes up in value, or you find someone else to take on the debt. Effectively, retail banking is a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And because it's a Ponzi scheme, it is guaranteed by the central bank. So the banks take the risk. They get to create the fiat currency. They get the cheapest interest rates. And then they're able to effectively turn every individual into a collateralized debt obligation, every company into a financialized and securitized, debt-dependent, subordinated product, as it were, where they can control board seats and then inflict policy as a portfolio. And of course, the end game is to bail out everything onto the government. And so the government is simply a piggy bank for this corporate interest that they're building into products. They control fiat currency, and then they manage a portfolio in order to effectively control all the assets, the gold, the hard assets, the shares, the debt, the equity, the derivatives. This whole complex is built together. But the end game is to turn every individual into a debt product, turn
Yes.
every corporation into an equity that you can borrow against so you have more debt, therefore you become subordinate to. And every government is to dump all of the debt on, but have a facade that they're in charge. And so most people think they're voting between left and right and there's a president making decisions. In reality, they answer to their lobbies, and the lobbies are all part of this financial industrial complex. And it's a pay to play auction prostitute system where effectively their job is to create a narrative on in front of what they're doing for their lobbies.
Wow.
But in the
Yes.
end of that cycle, because it is a Ponzi scheme, you effectively end up with all the debt on the government, and then you completely asset strip the country, and then you use war as a mechanism for doing a global reset, and you start to hedge your next location.
Well,
Is effectively how the system works.
let me ask you about that global reset, because the thing that really enlightened me when we had you on is I was asking you the question of, like, why would Trump do these things? Why would he spend this money? Why would he potentially go to war? It doesn't make sense. It just degrades American power. But you explained to me quite eloquently how really he's ushering in the multipolar world, and there are bigger forces at work. So what's the runway for this current failed fraudulent system? Like you say, how are they, like me and Tim have talked about many times in the gray area, how are they going to roll all that debt up? What's the new financial system going to be?
Well, my transition here is, so if you think about it, you had these constructs were created in the Dutch Empire. So you had Dutch East India Company, the corporate interest. You had the Dutch Central Bank, which created the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And then you had the Dutch government through the creation of the bond market, which was to assume all the debt. Eventually, they built a military force, and they ended up getting very, very inefficient and then outsourcing their ship making and naval fleet technology to the Brits. So then the Brits kind of ended up with the Bank of England, the British East India Company, and and the government ended up being bankrupted, and so you had that construct. Then the transition happened to the American empire. So you had a couple of central banks. Then you had the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve set up the debt-based Ponzi scheme, and effectively it was enforced by the fact that America had a massive manufacturing base. And because it had the manufacturing base, which previously the Brits had, which previously the Dutch had, you enter into a couple of wars, and America supplied all the weapons, manufactured all the weapons, and then created financial contracts to rebuild the rest of the world that was being destroyed by the bombs. So then you enter into a strategic tension. You have two ideologies funded by the same sides. In fact, you had three. Hitler was funded by Wall Street. The Federal Reserve was created by Wall Street and European bankers. The Reichsbank, the German central bank, had the very same brother that was the governor of the Federal Reserve on the German central bank. And also through the Bolshevik Revolution, you also created the Soviet Union and communism. And so Wall Street funded all of those. So you have three ideologies. You enter into a Cold War. You manufacture a narrative that justifies war and rolling over of debt. You had the Cold War. We're taking on the commies. We are the capitalists. Meanwhile, you're subordinating all of that debt onto the individuals, and everyone's going deeper and deeper into debt. But eventually what happened is America went bankrupt in 1971 after the Vietnamese War. And so America defaulted on its debt by saying you can no longer convert your dollars into gold. That was the promise after World War II, they said to everybody, stop converting your currency to gold, convert it to dollars at the IM, and at the IMF, you'll be able to convert it to gold with us. And so effectively in 1971, America defaulted. We created this fiat currency debt-based standard. And what happened then? We started to transition the manufacturing base away from America and over to China. So we had globalization, we had financialization being the tool because the government debt was no longer constrained by gold. And so the debt ballooned after 1971, and the entire American economy just became a product for the investment banks, the retail banks, the asset managers, the central banks, until eventually you hit the stage where we are right now, where you don't have another country to transition to because really, American, European, that Dutch, British, American thing was a continuation, but a transfer of power through the central bank.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to clarify specifically is like, China is trying to step into that new power role, but not everybody completely trusts China, specifically even in the West, and not even all of the Asian countries, which is why you have BRICS. Like, is that the second option for the polar world? Because you've got America that's on one side, and then you've got BRICS on the other side, right?
Yeah, so what you have right now is effectively this whole economy that was built in the post-World War II era on the military-industrial complex, but got financialized and securitized by the financial industrial complex. Let's call it FIC and MIC for simplicity. So the FIC became more powerful than the MIC once you had the 1971, the financialization. And the FIC only cared about profit maximization for its portfolio of companies. And it managed to get everyone to contribute their pension so that they were managing everybody's assets. All the insurance premiums were being contributed. They co-opted the education system for their portfolio. The colleges became money laundering organizations. And effectively, you built this whole complex around FIC being in control. And so once you made all those companies public and you burdened them with debt, you created a bit of a power struggle. Effectively, the military-industrial complex, their job was to prop up the dollar. So once they exited the gold standard, we had the assassination of King Faisal in Saudi Arabia when there was a war between Israel and the Arab states. That led to Saudi doing an oil embargo in 1973 that led to stagflation. But it also led to the assassination of King Faisal. Then a secret club, Safari Club, was set up by George Bush, which was a network of intelligence agencies that later led to 9/11 and various other operations. Right. But you created the petrodollar, where effectively, because you no longer had gold, you would use the military to enforce the world onto this petrodollar. And Saudis would agree to lend all of their dollars back to the US government. And then as long as people would accept treasuries as collateral and people would buy those bonds and treasuries, then you entered into this Ponzi scheme continuing to the point where we are right now. Just to give you an idea of how that works, and then we can go into BRICS. The way this actually works is currently the average interest on the US debt right now, approximately 40 trillion, approaching 40 trillion, is 3.3%. In order to keep the Ponzi scheme alive, America has to have a growth rate above 3.3%. If you don't have a growth rate above the average cost on the debt, then you enter into the unwinding of the cycle, which would be a recession and a depression. Every time that happens, they need to find a new way of printing money in order to try and stimulate growth. One of those is fund the military-industrial complex, create war. But the problem is with that is it extracts wealth from the average American person because they end up with the debt and the company ends up with all the profits. And so in order to keep the Ponzi alive, you have to extract all the assets from the average person, excuse me, and the economy becomes a mechanism for rolling over. Now, you have to have growth above the average cost of the debt. What's happening right now? in this global reset where all energy and 50 different supply chains are being renegotiated, the projected growth rate for America is approximately 2% this year and 1.7% next year. At the same time, the 10-year Treasury and the 30-year Treasury is spiking, not as much as the rest of the world, but it's spiking up to dangerous levels, 4.5% and 5%. So now you need to roll over $7 trillion of debt at either 4.5% or 5%. The only solution to that was what Trump tried to do. He tried to regime change the Federal Reserve and enforce low yield bonds on the short term by effectively dumping them on Americans. So the largest foreign lender to the UK, to the US government right now is Cayman Islands, which is the hedge funds. So what he tried to do is he tried to force interest rates down artificially low, by regime changing the Fed. And then they could be dumped on American people and American pensions, and you could subsidize the demonetization
What's going to happen
of this program.
What's going to happen because of this action or attempted action?
Well, effectively, that's all gone wrong. So now we enter into an inflationary cycle because this war was meant to be short. It looks like the IRGC put up a bigger resistance than anyone imagined was possible.
We're going to cover that.
So now you won't get the short-term rates down. The long-term rates are rising. Oil prices are going up, so you've created a supply shock and inflation, so you can't get those rates down. And growth is going to go down at the same time as unemployment. That is an absolute disaster. I do not want to reiterate how bad things are going to get from here. I'm not one to say doomerism. I've always believed they could keep this Ponzi scheme going for quite some time. But the growth rate is going to be significantly below the average interest rate, which means that the only solution here is to print more money than COVID, more money than long-term capital management, more money than the global financial crisis, and experience the same economy of the 1973.
Well, Simon, here's my issue with all of that, right? Like, Americans have been paying this bill, and not just Americans, around the world since 2022, and since the COVID era, where they printed $6 trillion already, right? We saw that hit our bottom line, and now I'm seeing these situations play out to where the oil's in play. People think they're trying to play 4D chess, and they don't understand that you can't control prices the same way that you can control a lot of other things.
We can do whatever we want.
Right. So now we look at it like, okay, gas prices is one thing. You've got diesel and fertilizer. Those things play out. And all of these inflationary costs keep stacking up for the average person. So what I really want to highlight, like, what is the immediate impact to the average person outside of just kind of these higher level breakdowns? Because people want to understand, like, what am I going to see in terms of what things are going to cost me? Because we're only seeing like the initial inflection point. We don't know what that
biggest
looks like.
Impacts on people.
Yeah, let's talk about those, because I want to understand those.
Yeah, so I think you got to break the world into region, but let's focus on America. So America, immediately, you will have the lowest gas price increases of most of the world because you are energy independent. However, it's going to be significantly more expensive. These gas, like, WTI oil is slightly below the price of Brent crude, which is slightly below the price of Oman, Brent crude as well. So now we disjointed all the oil markets. However, in order for this growth rate to continue without inflation, America needed oil to be approximately $40 as a sweet spot. It also needed interest rates to be significantly lower. So what does that actually mean? Well, immediately, you have an impact on the gas prices. Right prior to this war, there was a hot print, PPI, Producer Price Index. The Producer Price Index is the cost at which things are produced in America. CPI is the Consumer Price Index, the average price of goods for the consumer. When you get a hot PPI, it tends to mean in 3 months you'll have a hot CPI. So prior to this war, you had 3% PPI, which was up from about 2.4%. So already inflation was turning around. Then we had this hot print. Now we had the oil price shock. So you got gas prices at 4%, 30-year interest rates at 5%, which translates into mortgage rates at 7%. 10-year yield is setting credit card debt, auto loan debt. And so you've got real estate interests on mortgages that need to be refinanced. If you refinance, you're refinancing closer between 6 and 7%. So everyone that is in debt right now, if they need to refinance their debt, is going up. The cost of goods are going up. The cost of gas is going up. And then when that energy penetrates through the economy over the next 3 to 6 months, the price of everything is going up. Now, what is it going to go up to? It can only go up to an unsustainable price where it has demand destruction, i.e., all your money is gas. Excuse me. All your money is gas. All your money is interest on debt, your rent, your mortgage. And if you're already on the edge, expect things to get significantly worse over the next 3 months. That's baked into the equation today. That is even if the Strait of Hormuz opens today. If this stays on for another month or two, you're talking about a depression worse than what we experienced in the 1930s. The reason for that is because America saying that it's insulated is complete fallacy. It's propped up by the petrodollar. What's happened to the Gulf countries? They're no longer investing. Yeah. Where did all the growth come last year? All the growth came from the AI and data centers build out. That was two markets, the private credit market and Gulf money. Gulf money closed. Private credit closed. What else does it need? What else did AI need? Cheap energy.
Yes.
There's no way that ChatGPT can do an IPO this year at these prices.
No.
So now you've destroyed the IPO market, the private credit market, the oil market, the energy market, the bond market, and that comes into the stock market next.
It's like we got 1983, we got .com bubble, and we got the housing crisis, and we got the Iraq war all rolled into one. We're going to get into the war with you on the next segment. Both me and Tim have a lot of questions. Want to ask you about the Strait, want to ask you about Trump, want to ask you about China, want to ask you about Iran, ultimately, all of these things. Thank you so much, Simon Dixon. We're taking a break right now. We'll be right back with the news. Welcome back to the American Journal. Rex Jones, Tim Tompkins. We're here in studio today, and whether you're on your morning drive, getting your morning coffee, walking your dog, working out, whatever it is, we're just so happy that you chose to spend this time with us. And really key geopolitical analyst and Bitcoin early adopter, Simon Dixon. We wanted to ask Simon, I wanted to ask you specifically on real-world overt actions that are taking place in real time right now that we thought we'd never see. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, and every day we hear that it's open, that they're letting ships through as a sign of tribute, but we all know that's not true. So what's your take on the current crisis right now? Are they going to be able to keep the Strait closed? The Iranians, are the Americans going to be able to open it with Israeli help? Are Russia and China going to step in? Your thoughts?
Yeah, the Strait is closed. Unless you are willing to price oil in the Chinese yuan, expel the Israeli embassy and the US embassy from your country, then Iran will open you and allow shipments through. How is that enforced? So Iran is effectively a economy within a country. Think of IRGC as a faction of power, and underneath that there is a government called the Iranian government.
Right.
Effectively, the Iranian government voted in parliament that the Strait can be closed. The IRGC is a militarized force within Iran that has access to, the banking system, the ports, the military, various other infrastructure. They said that no one is allowed to pass the Strait. And then the insurers came along from Lloyd's of London and said, we won't insure anyone to go through the Strait. So that closed the Strait. You can't be insured. And how is that enforced? Well, the IRGC effectively, for the last 40 years, has built an underground structure in a ginormous natural fortress called Iran that's surrounded by mountains, where deep in the ground they have infrastructure for both a nuclear civilian energy program, as well as a drone manufacturing
But I
operation.
hate to interrupt you, Simon, but I got to tell you the truth right now. Lindsey Graham says that we have commandos that can go down there and take the uranium. And because Mark Levin says it's true, it must be true. And this is the thing that we've covered numerous times on the show.
Yeah.
I mean, we've showed the footage. It's publicly available. They brag about it. They have these giant underground missile cities, missile factories, the same with the drones, the same with everything. We look at that right on the screen.
Well,
there.
here's my
They've been prepping for 20 years.
They have been prepping for 20 years. And my thing is they talk about estimates. They're like, we know they have these capabilities. We know that we know they can do these things. I'm like, how do you 100% know that you are being certain about that? Like they don't even leave room for them being wrong in these situations. So I think we've vastly seen the underestimation of Iran's capabilities. But I want to ask you, Simon, like who actually holds the cards? Because you've seen the U.S. has their own set of demands, which were pretty fair in my opinion, with the 15-point peace plan, and then Iran has their own set of demands. So who really actually holds the cards to enforce, you know, one side or the other?
I don't know if that peace plan's fair. What's your take, Simon?
Yeah, so effectively, you got to think of America not as America, a sovereign country. To get to the understanding of the world, you have to understand that through the process of financialization and securitization, America is controlled by lobbies. And those lobbies are broken up into different interests. The most powerful lobby is the financial industrial complex. Then you have the military industrial complex. You also have the technical industrial complex, big pharma, you know, and then affiliated ones like APAC is more affiliated with Israel. Israel is a destabilization campaign where the military industrial complex makes loads of money through war and the financial industrial complex makes money through propping up the petrodollar. And so what you have to think about here is that in terms of America has a what's called a build back better model, and they're trying to implement it. What that means is you use the military in order to destroy a country and destroy infrastructure and subordinate leadership, install puppet governments, do color revolutions, destroy currency, engage in financial weapons of mass destruction, and just subordinate a country so that you can get access to the resources to come back to the consumption debt economy in America.
Some would call that terrorism. And we saw this debate with Dave Smith and Adam Sosnick. And Adam Sosnick gets his panties all in a twist because Dave calls the United States the biggest state sponsor of terrorism. And we pointed out a lot. We talk about Cuba and the various embargoes and, of course, the sanctions on Iran. We engage in economic warfare for decades on these countries. And I think that's the valuable perspective you bring here, is talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is no other word for it. I guess a nuance, if we want to get into the technicality, is that terrorism is officially, you know, normally for political goals. In America, it's for corporate goals. And so you're effectively renting out the US military to get you resources so that Chevron and Exxon can profit from them. And then obviously the American people pay for it.
Yes.
And so what the idea here is that you increase the bond market, which benefits the banks. Americans end up with the interest and the inflation. And that is all funneled back into resources that are needed to prop up the US stock market. The US stock market is currently 92% owned by the top wealthiest 10%. And so it's massive wealth extraction, the more war that happens. And then what happens once the war is over, you do the build back phase. So you get oil contracts, energy contracts, resource contracts. You know, in the case of Afghanistan, you got 20 years of military contracts. You got the revival of the CIA drug trafficking routes in order to get the, you know, continue the opium wars, as it were.
Right.
And you replace the Taliban with another version of the Taliban that would let the drugs get in. And so, you know, but all of this is wealth extraction. $2 trillion dumped on the American people. Trillions of dollars of profits for American private corporate interests.
What is your prognosis for the war? When does this exactly end?
Yeah. So what actually happened is it went into that phase where they're now destroying the assets in order to try and negotiate a new map of the world. And that map is being set by the financial industrial complex. Now, what you had from that is you had a resistance from the forever war model in the Middle East. To simplify it, the forever war model was you needed Israel to continually agitate war. You then needed USAID, CIA, and covert operations to fund militia groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda. You then needed Iran that was always a threat against Israel. So you have a narrative of strategic tension. You have death to America, death to Israel. And then they have a private economy that funds various resistance around Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis in Yemen. And you have constant strategic tension where there's always the justification for printing trillions of dollars and pushing the forever war model. That props up the petrodollar by having allies like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and the Gulf countries. But now you want to try and now we want to transition to what I think the financial industrial complex is doing, which is multipolarity. What that means is effectively now America is an energy exporter. China is funding all the Gulf sovereign wealth funds by purchasing their oil and gas. And the Middle East effectively, through their sovereign wealth, is able to get significant influence over American foreign policy. And so you've had this massive disruption, this global reset that basically is pushing Europe into America through energy dependency. And then the rest of the world is being propped up by Russian energy and China's manufacturing base, which requires the removal of US bases in the Middle East. It requires normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And it requires the end of the apparatus that makes the forever war model possible, which is Israel and the Greater Israel Project, IRGC, death to America, death to Israel, and then the radical evangelical Christian neocon Zionists within America that need to be re-educated. So they're going through a re-education camp right now to understand what Israel actually is. Take those three factions out, and you no longer have the forever war model, and you move the Middle East. Basically, what's happening is instead of the Middle East, which was a colonial term, you're looking from London, you're looking over to the east, and you see the middle of the world. You're returning it to what it was before, which is West Asia. So you're going to have Gulf countries, Iran, all aligned with China. And whose plan is this? This is 100% China's plan, which is why it has to be over. It was meant to be over in April when Xi Jinping and Trump were meeting. That meeting got delayed by 15th of May. If we continue with the Strait of Hormuz closed until the 15th of May, the price of oil will be $200. We'll have demand destruction on a scale we've never seen before. You've taken off 20% of the world's oil. The entire consumption economy requires that 20% to come back online. That's the equivalent of switching off the entire American economy in one go and wondering what the impact of the world will be.
Well, here's the thing, Simon. Somehow, you listen to the rhetoric that comes out of the White House. We talk about it doesn't matter if the strait is closed. America is releasing oil reserve. We'll supply the rest of the world. And the thing that I've tried to highlight specifically is not all oil is created equal, right? You've got different types of oil, light crude oil. You've got heavy crude oil, which is the stuff that comes from Venezuela. Diesel. And it's not the same equation. Now, I've seen a lot of the spaces that you and Suleiman have been doing lately where you guys are up to date. You're seeing current events. You're seeing all the things that are playing out.
The state of the war.
The state of the war specifically. What is the kind of one or two major things that you're seeing currently as of the last, let's say, 24, 48 hours that you see developing even beyond the context and the history?
Yeah, so the price of oil and the bond market are dictating the strategy that America is following. The second oil gets over $115, basically Trump has to fire a weapon.
Yes.
The first weapon was just lying. We're at peace. We've done a deal. And then the market crashed back down. Oil comes back down. We're done. The second tool was they got everyone to drain their strategic petroleum reserves. That's happening naturally anyway, because the world is in an energy crisis. I'm on an island right now that has ran out of diesel. Our supply chains are breaking, and we're getting ready with generators and you know, how to do everything through alternative means.
Really?
Effectively, we could become Cuba. Because
Wow.
Cuba knows that, you know, they had to turn to biofuels if this continues. Okay. Now, America can pretend, yes, we are energy independent. Yes, we have the energy that we need. But remember what the difference is. Russia has nationalized oil. America has privatized energy infrastructure. Who does this benefit? A few companies. Who's paying the debt? The Americans.
Well,
Who does it benefit in Russia? The country.
hold on,
The people.
just a moment. Let's get that Trump tweet back up. I'm going to read this to you, Simon. I want your opinion of what the dear leader is saying right now. Donald Trump, all of these countries that can't get jet fuel because the Strait of Hormuz, like the United Kingdom, which refused to get involved with the decapitation of Iran, I have a suggestion for you. Number one, buy from the U.S. We have plenty. And number two, build up some delayed courage. Go to the Strait and just take it. He's just saying, just go. You can do it. Just go take it.
You got it. You got it, man.
You'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore, admitting defeat already, as you're kind of talking about, just like you weren't there for the U.S. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done. Go get your own oil. What do you think of that lunacy?
Okay. People think that Trump is a lunatic if you think he works for the American people. If you know the corporate interests he works for, he's actually doing a perfect strategy for them.
Okay.
He's pumping up the price of oil. He's burdening the American people with debt. He's resetting all the energy negotiations. And what is he doing? There are three things. So prior to this, we were weakening the dollar. The dollar was getting weaker and weaker and weaker. That was needed because American needed to get independence from China's manufacturing base. Now, since the war, the dollar's blown up through the roof. That means that America's going more and more dependent upon China. It's reversing the rebuild of the manufacturing base because the dollar's strengthening. You know, so we've reversed that trend. Now, what props that up? The euro dollar, the petrodollar, and the Japan carry trade. So by putting Asia into an energy crisis and pushing them towards Russia to solve that crisis, and BRICS effectively, then that's the perfect way of achieving that. And then you push Europe into an American dependency for that energy. You split the world up into, you know, the hemispheres, and you, in order to get that, what do you need to do? You need, firstly, an inflationary cycle, and then either a recession or a depression. So the way you do that is you get the inflation up. You then have demand destruction. That means things are unaffordable. Everyone starts consuming, and you push the price, basically the demand for oil, down. So you've taken 20% of the oil offline. Now you need to get what price of oil gets demand destruction. And demand destruction means recession, depression, unemployment, and then you can get inflation down just by destroying the economy effectively. You need to make up for 20% of oil. So you've got to get oil up to about $200. So you need to be crazy. And then you need to break the, you know, effectively break the euro dollar for after the reset, break the petrodollar, and break the Japan carry trades, because Japan, through the 0% interest rates, were funding the US debt. So if you really want, you know, after this war is over, the only way to get the price to fix this right now is to crash the price of oil and get bond rates down. The only way to do that is for Trump to reach an agreement with Iran. And Iran effectively can carry on forever because it can keep the strait closed. There's only two countries that are economically insulated. The two countries that were sanctioned, Iran and Russia.
Yes.
So they already are completely insulated. You know, all they need is one thing: for China to buy their oil.
And the Russians
That's
are just
it.
rolling around in money now. I mean, for
760 million, baby.
18, about to be 19 sanctions packages passed in the U.S. alone. And then you look at Europe and all their efforts, and all that's out the window. And you look at just how big of a crisis this is. They had to throw that. They had to play that card.
Well, and the way I hear you describing it, Simon, like this is all part of a greater plan. And while I will agree with you on certain parts of that, I'm like, there's no possible way in my mind that, you know, someone like Trump and all the rest of the people who are behind the scenes are this calculated that they can take into account all the butterfly effects
The middle
in the chain and the chain reactions. Because here's the thing, if oil goes up to $200 a barrel, I don't think we know how that turns out. And because the world is so much more interconnected now than it ever has been in history, no one actually truly knows what the ripple effect looks like.
Well, and what's the timeline on top of that to make a deal? Like, what does that look like? Because you talk about the price of oil spiking. I mean, what if this goes on for another 6 months, God forbid?
Yeah, what happens if it goes on for 6 months?
Yeah, I'm really glad you said all those things, because there's a few things that people confuse around me trying to explain things and people interpreting it through their own lens. This is not Trump's plan. This is not Q. This is not trust the plan. This is not a genius. You know, Trump is the press secretary for his lobbies and greater powers.
He's the manager of the Burger King.
Now,
yes, sorry.
Exactly. Now, do the greater powers, financial industrial complex, technical industrial complex, military industrial complex, have a plan? Yes, they hedge for every outcome. They use derivatives market. They launch military operations. They try and get the resources. They have a business plan around the Build Back Better and the Forever War. And they know that if you can usher in law changes for a technical Orwellian, technocratic surveillance state nightmare, then they've hedged every outcome. If this ends up in civil unrest, then the technical industrial complex creates a police and surveillance state. If they manage to achieve peace in the Middle East and get a deal, then the financial industrial complex gets all the Build Back Better contracts. If this all fails and IRGC resists to the point where this goes out of control, then you effectively have the Forever War model and you rebuild all these military contracts. So mass weapons are being sold, you know, for defense, missile interceptors. And so BlackRock, as it were, State Street and Vanguard, the asset managers, they're okay, whatever happens. Now, you are right. Once you hit a point of $200 oil, you hit massive demand destruction. What is the model when you have demand destruction? Exactly what they did during the Great Depression of the 1930s. You consolidate wealth, just like the 2008 financial crisis. Get a big print, socialize the losses, privatize the gains, send all the small businesses bankrupt, send the individuals bankrupt, and try and put them on some kind of universal basic income.
No, you're 100%
There is a
right.
three-tiered strategy.
FDR
So
did
whatever
that.
the outcome is, they're going to concentrate wealth in the West. What is the resistance against that? This is the irony of the whole thing. Who's really draining the swamp right now? The factions of the IRGC that we would call the hardliners. They're resisting against the plan. They're taking out the US military bases. They're effectively pushing the Gulf countries away from the Epstein class over towards, you know, China and BRICS.
Right.
And they're effectively fighting for that multipolar world, as it were.
In that,
in that
spirit,
they are draining the swamp.
Yeah,
they are actually draining the swamp. They are taking on the deep state. Remember, the dollar is backed by the deep state. If you break the deep state, you break the Japan carry trade, the petrodollar, and the euro dollar, which means that America is shrunk into a regional power. And so taking on the deep state is what props up the dollar, and IRGC are taking on the deep state. Where does IRGC get its power from? Obviously from Russia and China. They're getting intelligence fed through. They've got asymmetric weapons set up with drones and missiles that make essentially big, expensive equipment that the US military were profiting from irrelevant. Now, of course, you can inflict damage on them. But what happens every time you hit an infrastructure? You push the price of oil up. Now, who benefits from the price of oil and gas going up? Russia as a sovereign state, Iran as a sovereign state, and American private big oil, big LNG, and the World Economic Forum agenda that wants a technocratic surveillance state where you will own nothing and be happy. Trump is delivering it for them to perfection. And the reason I think he's a blithering idiot is because they don't know what's going to happen. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And he's being told what to do next. And he's trying to communicate that.
They very clearly, they run these people. They're all empty suits. It's like you said, like he's the press secretary. In reality, I compare all these people to like managers of various fast food restaurants. And they may be the person that gives the checkout. They may be the person in the photo with the apron. But we all know the truth. We know the reality. They work for the people with the money. And I think that's what you so excellently break down. Because when we talk about these things, ultimately, we could talk about missile systems and destroyed interceptors and destroyed planes and destroyed U.S. bases and all of the nitty gritty. But in reality, it's all in service to this multipolar world that's being built around us. I think you're one of the best at breaking that down. I really appreciate you coming on here with us.
Yeah, we've only got like a minute here left, but where can people find you? Because there's a lot of information that you come out with every single week. You've got great spaces that you're in. You've got great podcasts that you're a part of. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I go through these very long, play-by-play, monetary transaction by monetary transaction in Bitcoin tech, macro, and geopolitics every Friday. It's like a 3-4 hour marathon. I break it down into AI on my blog, simondixon.com, if you've only got 10, 15 minutes. And then I'm always on X and giving live spaces and giving live minute-by-minute play as we go through this. Fortunately, Bitcoin made me financially independent, and I'm trying to get as many people as sovereign as possible. So sovereign countries, sovereign companies, sovereign individuals. And the real undertone here, which we didn't get to cover much, is what are you going to do to prepare? So hopefully we could come back to another show or something.
Yes, 100%.
Because
100%.
what really is important is you, your family, your community, because you can understand these big pictures. But right now we are in this is already a crisis. And if the Strait is opened every single day, it's not opened, it's going to get worse and worse and worse.
You are a gentleman and a scholar. Simon Dixon, we love you. Thank you.
While other networks lie to you about what's happening now, Infowars tells you the truth about what's happening next.